Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for February 26, 2018. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, joined by my colleagues, Mr. Kretz and Mr. Englander, and we're ready to begin. We'll start our meeting with general public comment. Are there any general public comment cards?
No, sir, there are not.
General public comment is closed. Are there any comment cards on any of the agenda items today?
No, sir, there is not.
Comment on all agenda items is closed. Thank you very much. And we're joined by Mr. Blumenfield as well. So, members, we are ready to go. I would propose, if there are no questions or concerns, items 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 to be taken up on consent. Item 5, the recommendation would be to concur in the action of the Public Safety Committee. Item 6, the recommendation would be to concur in the action of the Information Technology and General Services Committee. Item 7, the recommendation would be to concur in the action of the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee to note and file. Item 8, the recommendation would be to note and file. And item 9, the recommendation would be to approve. Any questions on those matters?
I had a question on item 5.
Item 5? Okay. Okay, so we'll hold item 5. Anything else, members? Okay, if there's no objections, then items 6, 7, 8, and 9 will be dealt with as I've indicated, and that will be the action of the committee on those items. We have one closed session item that actually I'd be happy to take up on consent as well to approve can we do that? Okay. So unless members have questions about the closed session item, we can to approve the city attorney's recommendation regarding. Okay. If there's no objection, then it'll be the action of the committee to approve the city attorney's recommendations on item number 1. So that will bring us then to item number 2.
Item number 2 is a communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. Richard H. Llewellyn, Jr. as the permanent city administrative officer.
Mr. Llewellyn, would you like to present on this item, Mr. Llewellyn?
Sir, I'd just like to say I'm very honored to serve the council, the mayor, the city residents of Los Angeles.
Have a seat.
I was hoping to lead, sir.
Did I say that was approved on consent? No, I didn't.
Yes, sir.
But I would like to invite you to make any remarks that you'd like to make to the committee. I think it won't require extended discussion, but I do want to present you with that opportunity since this is the first formal opportunity you've had really to do so in the council process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've worked for the city since 2001. I worked for the county for 15 years before that. Prior to that, I was in the private sector. I came to local government because I think it's where the rubber meets the road. It's where people's lives are impacted, affected, and it's our chance to make life different for people. Working in the city has been a great gift for me. I feel every day I come to work and I'm trying to do something for people who need our help. And that includes people who are not happy with our service. That includes people who have funds, who think that they're contributors to our city too, and their street up in the hills looks bad, and it does. And they need our service too. And it's a great honor. It's a great honor to work as the only department head who works for the council and the mayor. I've worked on both sides and love both sides. I've also run the city attorney's office, so I've worked in another elected office. And it's a great honor to work with the people in the office who are very committed to giving you the tools you need to make hard choices. You ran for these jobs, you put yourselves on the line, you put your name on the door, you get the comments in the grocery store, and you need us to help you make informed decisions. We don't try to make the decisions. That's not my goal, and that's not the goal of the staff, but they try to give you the information to make hard decisions. And it's an honor for us to serve in that role.
All right, thank you. Well, we're kind of have an advantage because you've been serving in the interim role now, and of course all of us have known you for many years before that. But we've actually been able to work with you in this specific capacity now for some time and gotten to know your work. So I'm not sure if we'll have extensive discussion, but I'd like to open it up for any questions that members may have. And we'll start with Mr. Kretz.
I actually have no questions whatsoever. I will say that I considered myself to be extremely lucky to get Rich to be my chief of staff for my first 4 years in office, and I always thought of him as Yoda, sort of the advisor that was the fount of all wisdom. He has so much experience and so much knowledge and so much common sense and intelligence to go with it that I don't think we could find a better CAO, and I am thrilled that he is in this position and hope to see it made permanent.
And I can actually vouch for that because I specifically remember when I first arrived in council, Mr. Kretz bragging about the fact that he had landed you, and he actually did that. He was boasting about it. Members? Mr. Blumenfield.
Great, thank you. No, I'm thrilled to see you move to this position. Do you have any criticisms of the interim CAO?
Anything you do differently? Or?
No, I won't ask you that. But are there any city organizational structures that you think should be changed to make us more efficient as we move forward? If you wanted to kind of give us a broad stroke advice about how you might see us changing in these next few years.
Sir, I'd rather work through those kinds of things with you than sort of give you my ideas. I think the city has been really focused since the financial crisis on trying to figure out a way to do things better and cheaper, and in a way that I don't know if our residents all understand, how people are sort of focused on the bottom line of being able to still deliver service when we have all these pressing needs and not enough money to do it. And how can we create a better widget every day? You're blessed with general managers who are actually among the best in the country, and all of them are trying to figure out how to do their jobs cheaper, faster, more efficiently every day. And so I just look forward to the opportunity to work with them and you.
What do you think the biggest challenge is for the next couple of years coming up that we're going to?
You know, we're all worried about when the economy is going to slow, and whether it's going to be a dive or just sort of a kind of lull. Most economists seem to think it's going to be sort of a slowdown, not a dive, but we certainly don't want to go back there. In our work, in the CAO's office, it's the sort of, unfortunately, it's the same things. The rising cost of employee costs, including benefits, infrastructure needs, tremendous infrastructure needs across the city, homelessness, and the need to serve the sort of rising gap between rich and poor, which is ultimately driving us down in Los Angeles, and we just have to figure out a way around it. One of the things we've been talking a lot about, certainly Mr. Krikorian, another area where we have actually, I think we're making real progress is sort of liability and sort of controlling those costs. But the infrastructure needs and the gap, sort of the equity needs in the city are very real. And we all go outside and see the tents, and we need to do something about that.
Well, thanks. As I said, I think you've been doing a great job as the interim, and I know you're going to continue to serve the city well as our permanent CEO.
Mr. Islander?
You know, you mentioned that you've worked on both sides. I thought we were all on the same side. So if you can just talk us through why we're not.
Sir, I appreciate that credit.
So having worked with you in certainly many different capacities, I think we couldn't ask for anybody better. So delighted to look forward to you as the permanent. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, then if there is no objection, and I really don't sense that there is.
I might have an objection.
Oh, I forgot. I'm so sorry. Mr. Bonin, I'm so sorry.
No, I have no objections. I've known and worked with Rich since, when was Eric elected? 2002?
I think probably before that when I was in the county, sir.
Yeah, for nearly 20 years. So he's worked for some very distinguished elected officials. And, you know. No, I think you're a fantastic choice, and I'm enthusiastic about it. So No objections. I will forever hold my peace.
Thank you very much. Well, then, it will be without objection, it will be the enthusiastic action of this committee to approve Rich Llewellyn as our permanent Chief Administrative Officer. So congratulations, Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you, council members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
And Mr. Chair, for the record, this matter is scheduled for council tomorrow, February 27th.
Hey, Rich, don't forget, tomorrow, council. You're expected there. Okay. That will bring us to item number 3.
Item number 3 is continued from January 29, 2018. It's a city attorney report and ordinance adding Chapter 172 to Division 5 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to create the Economic Development Trust Fund for the receipt and disbursement of 50% of all monies for economic development projects or programs that are received by the city from the sale or lease of city-owned property, and amending Los Angeles Administrative Code Section 5.500 to authorize the use of real property trust funds for economic development.
Miguel
Good afternoon.
Dagner, Deputy City Attorney, and I believe the last time there was some questions as to the wording of the ordinance, and the CLA's basically told us to add some wording to subsection B of 5.578, which says limits the money to funds which have been for sales of property which have been designated by the council as economic development opportunities under the asset management framework policy as approved by the council. So we've drafted that. And then also an additional question came up, which I was still a little vague about, whether on the council district real property trust funds, whether it was the council's desire to also amend that to ensure that 50% of the money went into those properties, or if they still wanted to leave it as it is. So I've prepared drafts just with the original section, and then also one which amends the real property trust funds for each council district to basically add that same language whenever there's a surplus property sale or a property that's been designated for economic development, then 50% of the money goes in there. And it was kind of vague at the end of the last committee meeting what the desire was.
Yeah, I don't recall that it was discussed to change the council district portion of it. But I think for me at least, and members pipe in if there's something else, but for me the issue was to ensure that the proceeds would be split in this fashion only as to those properties that had been designated as economic development properties. So not all city properties that are disposed of, but rather those that the council had designated as being for economic development. And the proposed language that I have before me here does that, effectuates that. I don't recall any discussion about changing what would be any limitations being placed on the council district's discretionary funds.
It wasn't really limitations. There was just a discussion whether 50% of the money from the sale of these pieces of property went automatically into the council file district trust funds. It was my understanding that it wasn't necessary, and I believe the CAO had said no, that automatically 50% of the money will continue.
Currently, under current law, that's
under
what
current law, but it's really kind of, because before it was all surplus property, this economic development sales thing really didn't exist until the elimination of the CRA. So now I wasn't sure whether you wanted to kind of clean up the real property trust funds to put in another thing that's saying that 50% of economic development property, the sales proceeds from 50% of these funds will go into your funds or not.
I think it's coming back to me now that in our back and forth, you had expressed a view that it wasn't entirely clear by ordinance now. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't clear in the ordinance, and we weren't instructed to do that, to amend the trust funds. But then in our discussion, it seemed like it was the desire of the council to make sure, and that's what the CAO had said.
Yes.
I prepared two ordinances. One amends subsection B of 5.57A, and it also amends A of the real property real property trust funds It says, for all sales of surplus city real property and city-owned property which has been designated by the council for economic development opportunities under the asset management framework policy as approved by the council, which are located in the city, and then it goes on to exclude the, so the last part is what I added, if that's the desire.
That makes, so that when there's a sale of economic development property, the proceeds with regard to the council are treated in the same way as current surplus property is.
Correct.
And I think that was everyone's intention, wasn't it? Okay.
Okay, so
All right. Any other?
do an amendment by interlineation, and I can cite it and provide it to the city clerk if that would be the most expedient thing.
I think it would be. Any other further questions on this matter, if that's the case, members? Okay. All right, then, if you have that language and you're prepared to do that,
Yes.
why don't we hold this on the desk until we get it written out, and then we can read it into the record, and that will be the recommendation.
I have written it out.
Okay.
If you'd like me to provide it to the city clerk.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and give that to Mr. Williams, and we'll read that in as the recommendation then.
I have different versions, just in case.
Richard Williams, City Clerk's Office. We have received a draft ordinance amending Chapter 172 to Division 5 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to receive eligible proceeds from the sale or lease of city property for economic development purposes, and amending Section 5.500 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to authorize the use of real property trust funds for economic development projects or programs, including public infrastructure development subsidies or technical assistance. Shall I read the entire ordinance?
No, but the amended language on 5.578B with regard to the purpose of the fund, as well as this new interlineated language.
The language for Section 5.578, creation and administration of the fund, subsection B, the purpose of the fund shall be for the receipt, retention, and disbursement of 50% of all monies received by the city from the sale or lease of city-owned property, which has been designated by the Council for Economic Development Opportunities under the Asset Management Framework Policy as approved by the Council, or any other monies which are otherwise appropriated to the fund for economic development projects within the city. And I'm sorry, the other section?
Okay, and then the other section is what number?
It's 5.50 B, I believe. I have too many versions. It's what Section 2 is of the ordinance now. It's amending paragraph A. Oh, actually,
We don't have
you know what, I made an error, because it's really amending paragraph B, and I wrote A.
Okay, but do you have an interlineated copy?
Yeah, well, I have a book where I bolded the line, but this is really that's a B, not an A, so I don't know if I need to give you a new clean copy.
Okay. And for Section 5.578, subsection, I'm sorry, Section 2,
It's Section 2 of the ordinance.
the second full sentence, paragraph A of Section 5.500, Chapter 100 of Division 5 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code is amended to read as follows. For all sales of surplus city real property and city-owned property, which has been designated by the Council for Economic Development Opportunities under the Asset Management Framework Policy as approved by the Council, located in the City of Los Angeles, except for property located in the Venice area, as that term is defined in Section 5.121 of this code, including but not limited to Sections 5.121, 5.121.2, and 5.547, 50% of all net proceeds collected from each sale, to the extent allowed by law, shall be placed into the fund for the council district in which the property is located, to be used for the purposes set forth below, except, however, for the sale of any surplus properties in the City of Los Angeles approved by City Council for use in support of the city's using public land for affordable and homeless housing strategy, pardon me, completed on or after July 1st, 2016, and prior to July 1st, 2017. Net proceeds shall be distributed as provided in Section 7.33.11 of this code.
All right, that does it?
I believe so.
Okay. Any other questions on this one, members? All right, then without objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve the ordinance as amended, as Mr. Williams just read, and advance that forward to council. All right. And there's no objection, so without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. That brings us to item number 4.
Item number 4 is the CAO report relative to approval of proposal and authorization to submit to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development findings regarding previous community development block grant projects.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Shafi Amir from the Office of the CAO.
And I'm Julie O'Leary with Housing and Community Investment.
Before you is the CAO report addressing the Housing and Community Investment Department's transmittal regarding a request for authority to submit a letter to HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, to resolve audit findings regarding previous city community development block grant projects found to have been incomplete or otherwise ineligible for grant funds. In their draft letter, which is attached to their transmittal, HCID proposes a repayment plan over 3 years for a total amount of $5.9 million. HCID also requests, upon acceptance by HUD, the allocation of $5.9 million in general fund for the repayment to HUD. HCID's draft letter to HUD finds that approximately $8.3 million total is owed to HUD for the monitoring and review findings from 2011 through 2017, and that approximately $2.7 million from the proceeds of property sales originally acquired with CDBG funds is available for the repayment. So that leaves a balance of about $5.9 million that's still owed to HUD by the city. The CAO concurs that $5.9 million is owed to HUD to resolve the findings, and the CAO report presents 2 options for repayment, which our office wanted to make council aware of. Our report recommends for the council to select one of the 2 options for repayment. Option A is to approve HCID's request to utilize general fund to repay HUD for the total amount of $5.9 million and give authority to HCID to submit the draft letter as is to HUD. And option B would be for council to determine amounts and to repay the $5.9 million with a combination of a reduction in the city CDBG allocation and or general fund repayment as determined by council over a 3-year period as well. And it would direct HCID to amend their draft letter accordingly. Both options would instruct HCID to report back upon response from HUD for the implementation. And in Housing Committee a few weeks ago, the committee approved option A. In cases where grantees owe substantial repayment to HUD for ineligible grant expenditures, HUD does offer the option for the grantee to request the reduction, and that's just some background information in case that was something that's needed. We can answer those questions. As a very general estimate by our office, the city's general fund has assumed or been requested to assume support of former CDBG costs, roughly in the amount of about $13 million annually ongoing for both program and administrative con plan expenses. That's a very rough estimate, and this is separate from the current issue, i.e. the funds owed to HUD. The CAO anticipates a general fund impact for both options A and B because funding has not been budgeted for this item, and of the $5.9 million that's owed, approximately $300,000 is owed directly to the U.S. Treasury due to a specific type of audit finding, and therefore that can't be offset anyway by the CDBG reduction. That's generally our remarks on the report. We can answer questions, and HSID can present as well.
Would you like me to comment? Or?
Sure, if you want to add further.
Yeah, our report was in favor of what became option A. We think that with what option B presents would be a decrease overall in services, projects, and staffing to the city unless it was offset by general fund. We have been working hard on the city's relationship with HUD, and we think that it would not be in favor of it. HUD is, according to the guidance that they issued, is reluctant to accept this, and part of what the city would have to do would be to indicate that we were unable to pay this nearly $6 million, and that's why we're asking for it be offset from the future entitlement, and I'm told that that's roughly equivalent to 0.03% of our budget. So we think as far as services and the relationship and projects being built, because if we get it offset in future years, not only are we missing out on the original projects that didn't meet an objective for the project, we're also not having money that would be the general fund that would go into the projects or in through our line of credit.
Okay. Well, just to be clear, we've been in the business for as long as I've been here of backfilling CDBG cuts every single budget year. So if there were a reduction in future CDBG allocation, I'm confident that, that would probably impact our general fund as well, because we would probably find ways to continue to support these programs. At first glance, it would seem that stretching it into the future with reductions off of future allocations would allow us an opportunity to plan for the long term, develop cost efficiencies, put off until tomorrow what we, should do today, which is always something that, has some benefit when it's the expenditure of money. So at first glance, option B would seem to be the more attractive one in terms of its impact on the general fund, regardless of whether we're determined to backfill that amount or not. But I think what I heard in housing, and which I think is the most compelling argument, it's very difficult. Well, maybe I shouldn't state it. Let me ask it. What would be the what would we need to demonstrate to the federal government in order to exercise that option? And what would be the impacts on the state, on the city's creditworthiness and our relationship with the federal government if we were to make those showings?
Well, I can't comment on the creditworthiness. That's outside of my sphere. But as far as it said, we have to, it would come from the mayor's office as the chief elected official, and we would request in writing a reduction and indicate our inability to pay the grant and explain why.
And that's correct. That's from the direct HUD guidance that was provided as these options available to grantees. Regarding creditworthiness, I'm not exactly sure as far as what that direct impact might be, but our office would probably assess that. I don't know if this is a direct debt issue. I mean, it's definitely funding that's owed to HUD, but as far as like the findings by the grantor. But
no, what I'm saying is if we had to put in writing and say to the federal government, I'm so sorry, but we can't come up with $6 million. To me, that is a pretty extreme statement that we would have to make in order to justify the option B. So that's my bigger concern is, what does that do to the investment community when we're saying that we really just can't come up with $6 million? But anyway, members, Mr. Englander.
I don't have as much of a concern with that because it's also easy to explain. We do annual budgets. It wasn't something that was in our annual budget. And we also have other extraordinary needs that we're attempting to fund right now. And so with that, the idea that, it was a statement that was made, it was 0.03% of our budget. I think you could start dissecting that a million different ways and looking at, well, what's discretionary versus what's not. 70% of our discretionary portion of the budget goes into public safety. There's bottom line is, even if it was 0.0001%, we're on limited resources with general fund dollars. And looking at, I think, Mr. Krikorian, what you opened with, and looking at how to offset that off future CDBG potential losses, yes, we've certainly programmed for that before. And looking at other creative ways as we go down that path. There's certainly new funding mechanisms coming online lately to supplant where a lot of the CDBG money has diminished. So I think that would be our best bet. I would caution how we write the letter and suggest that it's not of a financial crises, because I don't think the guidelines call specifically for that. I think option B creates an option that we should exercise. And since it hasn't come up or been explored yet with potential credit rating issues, that tells me it's not a big red flag at this point. And my understanding of the process is that we make the offer first. We can continue after that and see what they come back with. And that would be my suggestion.
Is that the case?
Currently, yes. What HCID's transmittal is a draft letter that contains the proposal, the city's proposal to HUD, and requests approval from HUD to make the payment over 3 years. So right at this point, yes, it would subject to HUD approval. I mean, the city's working group has been talking directly to HUD during this process to formulate a proposal that would be acceptable somewhat to HUD, and it is a 3-year payment plan. So yes.
And I think it's nice that HUD's finally talking to us.
Right. And so, it's subject to, that's why the option B, the way it had been worded in the CO report, would require an instruction to HCID to revise or edit the draft letter and to change it according to how the council wants to proceed forward, as far as the amounts go or the reduction goes.
I'm not sure I follow you on that last point.
Well, option B, the recommendations, leave it to the council's discretion. Approval of option B would direct HCID to use a combination of reduction of the comp plan, CDBG, and general fund, and or whatever mix of amounts, because you have the option of doing a partial offset if you wish and using partial general fund, or using the maximum amount of the CDBG reduction, and then revise the letter to reflect that. Because right now the draft letter that's attached to HCID's transmittal is going to basically, is contemplating using general fund 100% to repay HUD.
Mr. Kratz.
Do we have any sense of how likely we would be to get option B accepted by the federal government?
Not yet, no.
So no sense of that?
No, because we'd previously been in conversation with them about the 3-year plan with the general fund, and I mean, they were the one that we talked about a repayment plan. So, so we would need to follow up with them and find out about that.
One thing I wanted to add, and it may not have been mentioned in my remarks, is that the repayment, the general fund repayment, which HCID requested, and it's in their transmittal, the majority of the funds are going back into the comp plan, so it's using general fund to pay the comp plan line of credit. So that part is in the transmittal. It may not have been mentioned. And then, so the money is coming back in that sense and to the comp plan with the general fund repayment. I think $300,000 of it is going back to the U.S. Treasury, which is because of the nature of the audit finding that was found on that one. And I believe I mentioned that in the Housing Committee, but it may not have come out in this presentation.
Mr. Blumenfield?
To understand the difference between the 3-year and paying it up front, is there any sort of interest rate or anything to that effect? I mean, to me, it's sort of a numbers game. The amounts of money we can absorb as a city, it's nicer to smooth out the budget impacts by doing it over time. But just from a financial perspective, if it's just dollar for dollar, or is it based on an interest rate of some sort that?
No, there would be no interest rate.
So it's just dollar for dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so then financially it makes sense to spread it out, because a dollar in year 3 is worth less than $1 today. Or
Yes, and the difference would be, would we be asking that we use the general fund to go to our line of credit so that programs could still go on with the general fund, or that we ask that the entitlement for the next 3 years be reduced? If it was, for example, it would be...
The reducing, I mean, all of that is kind of a zero-sum game, right? Because we're going to backfill it. If we reduce it, we're going to backfill it, we're going to try to.
Well, we've typically, when we've been backfilling, it's been for, we've been backfilling, it's been for staffing and for services. It's not been for the construction projects. So the difference would be there as well.
I'm not exactly sure if I understood your question, but just to clarify, HCID's proposal to use the general fund for the repayment, they're also proposing to have it go over a 3-year period, so to divide it by 3 and to repay. So both options A and B, the way they're presented and contemplated, is to do it over a 3-year period, so you're not, whatever funding source you're using, you're not giving it all up front. But
okay, so there's no difference then financially?
Because it's a straight repayment of the findings, of the amount of the findings.
Okay, I thought one of them was basically we were doing more upfront funding, and the other we were spreading it out. You're saying the only difference is
the source of funding. So option A is HCID's proposal to repay with general fund over a 3-year period, and that's the proposal that they want to send to HUD using general fund. So it'd be one, breaking it up into 3 over 3 years. And option B, the way it was presented in the report, CAO report, is to also ask for it over a 3-year period of HUD, but to use a combination of general fund as the source of repayment and a reduction in CDBG, so that would mitigate the impact on the general fund. But it's still over a 3-year period.
And we would have to get approval for the 3-year repayment as well, either way, either the reduction to the grant or a repayment.
I mean, it seems like then it's kind of a 6 one way, half dozen the other, unless you're saying what we're really weighing is the value of the CDBG programs. By putting in the general fund, then we're assuring more CDBG money down the road. Is that the concept?
Well, if we offset the entitlement, or if we take a reduction to the entitlement, that would also reduce our administration by nearly $400,000 for those 3 years, and for our services by nearly $300,000. In total, it would be nearly $2 million.
Our administration. What is
the portion that we can spend on planning and administration, so for staffing costs.
Right, but if we make that up, that doesn't reduce how much we can draw down from the feds, does it? Because isn't part of the federal formula how much you get is based on how much you have how much you've spent each year? But do we endanger our numbers going forward by having a lower number?
Only for those 3 years. Our cap would be reduced.
So our cap, I'm trying to understand the unintended consequences. If our cap gets reduced, does that mean we draw down less federal money? Because the overarching goal, I think all of us share, is how do we maximize our federal dollars? And so if that's one of the consequences, we need to know that.
Yes, for those 3 years with the reduction. If our entitlement was reduced, that would also reduce our public service and our administrative caps for those 3 years. If we did.
When you say our public service,
that's family source, domestic violence.
From the federal government to us.
Yes, and how much? So for our federal entitlement, we are capped on how much we can spend on services and how much we can spend on staff.
When you say spend, you mean money from the federal government that
yes.
we're spending. So if we do it that way, we get less federal money for those 3 years, not just proportionate to the amount that we're spending out, but you're saying we're actually losing leverage on the future dollars?
Only for those 3 years. After the 3 years, our caps would come back to whatever the entitlement was for that year.
Okay, I'm going to ask Ms. Kalklein to jump in.
Let me see if I can kind of clarify a couple of things. Under option A, the recommendation is to pay for this out of the general fund over the course of 3 years. Mm-hmm. If that's done, it's done. It doesn't affect the amount of the block grant dollars that we would get under normal circumstances. Under option B, you would actually be requesting a reduction in the entitlement for those 3 years from the block grant. What was being said is that for the block grant, there are 2 caps that apply. One is an administrative cap. There's a percentage of the amount of the entitlement that can be used to pay for administrative expenses. And there's a public services cap, a percent that can be used for public services. If the entitlement is reduced, then the amounts available under those caps is also reduced. So if the council desires to to make up those dollars, it's going to come from the general fund, most likely. So almost in either case, you'd be using general fund money, but you'd also be asking for a reduction in the entitlement, and you'd get that subsequent reduction in the caps. The other issue that was also raised is that in order to reduce the entitlement, would be communicating to the federal government that there are no other funds to pay for this. And that's, whether you want to make that statement and send that to HUD at this time is something that you may want to consider.
Meaning you're saying there's a negative consequence to doing that?
Correct.
Okay. A couple of questions, not based on this 3-year issue, but just trying to understand how we got into this again. It's taken us a long time to resolve the 2011 to 2017. Is all of this due to complications from the CRA, or is there something else at play here?
When I was looking at the projects, what I could see was that 92% of the activities were CRA projects. So for the funds that we owed to the majority.
So they're basically CRA deals that went south because it was dissolved?
No, some of them preceded that, I believe, but and they didn't reach, part of what the grant requires is you have to reach a national objective. They have certain goals that you have to set, and they didn't reach them. And so as a consequence, we have to pay back with or what HUD has said is to pay back the funds with non-federal funds.
Okay, and then the other, so we're basically blaming the CRA for screwing that up.
I didn't say that.
Is that, I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing, right?
We can. I think we can.
I don't know, for 92%. And then there was a couple of odd things, like the Adams La Brea North acquisition. It seems like they purchased 4 properties for $3.25 million, but then sold them for $1.2 million, which seems, I didn't quite understand that, because even given the depression, we shouldn't, or recession, I guess, we shouldn't have seen such a decrease in value. And that was one of the ones. Could you explain that?
Well, for all of the properties, what we were trying to do was to maximize how much we could actually get credit for, and we were looking at the properties and those that actually met a national objective, what HUD requires, and in this case, there were some of the properties that LASA used for shelters and operated out of. So for those, we were able to count them as far as a credit, and so that's part of the money when Shafia was talking about that we have funds that would come back that we're not asking for the general fund. So it's a mix for that $3.2 million. It's a mix of different kinds of things. I could provide the detail on that, but it's of various, because there were various properties involved. We tried to leverage the most that we could as far as really looking at what met an objective and what didn't.
And just to add on that, the total amount of the findings that HUD found is about $8.3 million, and HCID and a variety of other city departments, including the mayor's office, has been working to see what they could. The letter to HUD proposes to change some national objectives and to reduce the impact of the findings. So it went down from 8.3, with some, including what Julie mentioned, is that to request that there were some accomplishments made on a certain project to count that and to offset the amount of the findings. So the letter includes all of that for the projects as well. And HCID has the information on that.
And then even some of the projects that are, like the Westlake Theater. We reimbursed for $2 million in this, but we now own the property, and presumably we're going to recoup some of that money through development of the theater and other things. Is there ways that we recoup some of the loss?
So in my understanding on that one, that's actually counted as part of, we are getting 35% of that property, and that's actually part of the mayor's proposed year 44. There's some $693,000 in the mayor's proposed budget that the CLA is in the midst of analyzing, given recent direction by the housing committee. So they would be looking at that. But that's something that just
You're saying
would be
money
coming.
proposed, money coming in or money going out?
Money coming into us from the sale, that they sold it for the $2 million, so that would be a piece of it.
Sold for the $2 million, but then I thought we own it now. So we're getting the money back. That would be the 26% of the revenues that the city gets from the property tax.
Steve Andrews, Mayor's Office. A couple of points. Regarding Westlake Theater, we negotiated an option. It was one of the 10 option sites. When the appraisals came in on that site, the dissolution law requires CRA to sell them for fair market value. That was in the permission we were given by the state on properties that we hold options on, we have to pay fair market value. When the appraisal came in on Westlake Theater, it was appraised at $10 million. That's a three-part appraisal, the city's appraiser, the CRA's appraisal, and if there's a difference of more than 10%, a third appraisal. The city, in face of that $10 million, the council office advised the mayor to forego the option. We turned that property back to CRA. They sold it then at auction, which is all they're allowed to do, and so the delta turned out to be a much lower sale price on their part, and then we collect our share. So that's why the dynamic in both the first project and on this project, CRA sale prices are not, they're simply auction prices. They go through an auction process, select the lowest responsible bidder. And in several cases, that turned out to be substantially less than the funds that went in, remembering also that in some cases, those included eminent domain actions, demolition, relocation, other items that were city funds that were placed in those projects. I also just want to mention that in option A, the funds that you would be asked to pay out of the general fund would be kept in the city. They would be returned to the city. Those projects those dollars would come back to you for reprogramming in the next CONPLAN budget. So the difference, I think, is you spread the money over 3 years either way. Option A brings the money back into the city and brings it back into a budget process that you will determine in the following year. The other option reduces the amount of money we ever get, reduces the caps, and therefore puts a lot of pressure on staffing and on social service programs. We strongly recommend option A. We are very concerned about the requirements that the mayor certify that there are no funds available and that those documents go out into the community for the citizen participation process with that finding. Frankly, we're not sure how we could really make that finding.
Yeah, and I have to confess my own error. When I made my initial argument, I had misread option A, and I thought we were going to have to pay the entire amount in a single budget year, and I was still prepared to do that. So stretching it out over 3 years is an even easier call for me. I think we should proceed with option A, and I hear what you're saying, Mr. Englander, but I'm convinced that regardless of which option we pursue, it's going to have the same impact out of the general fund. We're still going to be paying that. And I'd be a little concerned with reducing our requests from the federal government, whether that sets a new baseline too. And if, yes, it's only over 3 years and it's a plan that we agree with them, but they're cutting back every single year anyway, and to say for the next 3 years, let's reduce our amount, that may become the new normal, and I'd be very concerned about that happening even more, or becoming even more likely than it already is. Members, anything else on this? Okay. Mr. Englander, you want to, I'm going to go ahead and recommend that we concur with the Housing Committee on option A, but, okay, so, objection? No? Okay, then without objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it kind of made sense, All right. That brings us, I think, to item number 5.
Item number 5 is the CAO report relative to the Los Angeles Police Department Basic Car Area Boundary Study.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Mr. Blumenfield, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So excited about this study coming out. Curious, though, if the RFP request recommendations, if they have about how to consider projected population growth and development or should it? You know, areas, and I'm thinking particularly like the Warner Center in my area, growing very fast. How much of this is forward-looking in terms of that kind of thing?
Tyler Munhall, CAO. Deliverable number 2 indicates that they're going to talk with the planning department. We didn't state it outright that they're going to work with them to get population growth projections, but that will be part of the analysis. And population in terms of how much population there should be in any one basic car area is going to be evaluated.
But so we'll be looking at the future growth as well.
Yes.
Because I think that's really important. I mean, and I don't know how to deal with this, but oftentimes with development issues, one of the big complaints that we all get about a new project going up is, well, the police resources are stretched too thin. And this new housing building is going to cause them to be stretched even thinner. And so I don't know if there's a way in all of this to reward folks that do accept the extra growth so that there may be a counter to that when a building goes up, that it does impact the basic car plan in some way, shape, or form. If there's a way to include this kind of consideration into the RFP so that as we do consider more density in different areas, we're able to assure the community that that density will also be reflected in its public safety increases.
And our goal is that at the end of this, we will have a set of criteria, that objective criteria that can be used on an ongoing basis, a model, if you will, on determining you've had A, B, and C occur in the city. How does that change or increase, or I wouldn't see decreases, but increase the number of basic car areas that are needed? And you should be able to plug that into a model and get a result. That's essentially what we're looking for in deliverable number 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bohn, anything?
No, eager to see this get moving.
Me too. Anything else, members? No. All right. If there's no objection, then it will be the action of the committee to concur in the action of the Public Safety Committee.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you. Is there any other business before the committee?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
Seeing none, we are adjourned.